The Red River Resistance by Lillian, Jason, Rain, and Nicholas.
What to expect in our presentation. So our presentation has been broken into 4 parts, each member responsible for one segment. The history and culture of the Métis and the land in which they resided, as well as the growth and issues that were faced that eventually led up to the resistance. Second one, the resistance and the formation of Manitoba. Third one, the aftermath and what followed. Fourth, what makes this resistance a vital part of the history of Indigenous rights and resistance.
Why we chose this movement. As a group, we discussed why this movement was our choice in specific, and how we came to the conclusion that it's heavily due to how it was tied into the formation of Canada. The concept that Canada was created by colonization is no secret, and the history of the Métis is tied directly into the Confederation. The Métis were a result of coexistence, and this uprising shows their vigorous determination to stand up for their rights, a newer way of life in which was created through this not always fair collaboration overall. This resistance and the Métis are the history of Canada.
Métis values. Their core values were deeply rooted in family relationships, community connections, and personal autonomy. They had even developed their own laws of the prairie to regulate the massive bison hunt. The river lot system. The community was built on the river lot system, where farms were long, narrow strips facing the river. This was economically essential because it allowed every family to have access to water and hay. Conflicting ideologies. This way of life came under threat after Confederation in 1867, where the domination of Canada, led by John A. Macdonald, sought to expand from sea to sea. The threat. The dominant Canadian culture at the time was Anglo Protestant and often viewed the French-speaking Catholic Métis as uncivilized. Canada planned to impose a square grid survey system on the land which ignored the existing river lots and threatened to destroy Métis farms. Historical and geographical context. The sale of Rupert's Land in 1868, the Hudson's Bay Company agreed to sell Rupert's Land to Canada for £300,000. This was a massive transfer of land, yet the 12,000 inhabitants of the Red River settlement, mostly Métis, were not informed or consulted. They felt the HBC did not have the right to sell their territory without their consent. In 1869, before the transfer was even finalized, the Canadian government sent land surveyors to the settlement. These surveyors began running lines for the new grid system directly through existing Métis homes and farms. The Métis viewed this as a direct physical threat to their land rights and the way of life. Who are the Métis? Origins and culture. The Métis emerged in the late 18th and early 19th centuries as descendants of European fur traders and First Nations women. Over time, they developed a unique culture, including a distinct language called Michif, the Independent Ones. They chose the name Otuminawak, which translated to the Independent Ones, or the people who themselves, reflecting their strong sense of identity. The Red River Settlement. This settlement was the heart of Rupert's Land. It was a multicultural community that included French-speaking Métis, English-speaking country-born Métis, scholar settlers, and First Nation people living together.
The Resistance and Formation of Manitoba by Rain. Riel. Louis Riel. Louis Riel, who is recognized as a Métis leader, was born in the year 1844 on the Red River Settlement, which is now referred to as Winnipeg. His father was Franco Chippewayan Métis. Riel came from a family who were heavily Catholic, leading him to begin studying abroad in Montreal to become a priest at age 14. Riel dropped his studies at age 20 due to his father's death. Rest in peace. Prior to the Red River Resistance, the name Riel was already stood quite strong, as his father had been one to lead a prior resistance, in which was support of Guillaume Sayre, a fur trader who resisted the monopoly of the Hudson's Bay Company. Sire was arrested in 1849 for breaking the company's policy by trading to other regions. Louis Riel's father, Louis Riel SR, had been the one to defend him in court and argued for his right to choose a jury with his resistance of other Metis men. His return upon his father's death. Upon his father's death, he began to work to support his family, working as a law clerk for some time, residing in Montreal, Chicago, and St. Paul, before returning back to the Red River settlement in 1968. Though a devoted Catholic, this time period, he suffered from a sort of religious crisis, believing his past identity was dead, and he devoted himself to form a new religious movement. This is what is speculated to have led him to be such a devoted leader to the Métis. What he returned to. In the summer of 1869, the Canadian government sent John Stuart Dennis to survey the land due to confrontation. He moved on, leaving Fort Garry, and instead started on Oak Point, starting this before the land had even been officially transferred and stirring tension into the communities. When Dennis finished and arrived with his crew to Fort Garry on October 11, 1869, they began to survey the land, which was already owned. Riel and other Métis men quickly put a stop and sent Dennis and his men away. This was the first form of resistance against land surveyors in the Red River settlement. Right upon his return, Riel was made aware of the growth in population and the change in environment on the Red River settlement. The formation of Canada and the selling of Rupert's land already showed troubles, as previously mentioned, and stirred worry into the community, leaving no option but interference. This led to Riel meeting with John Bruce, a Métis carpenter who commonly represented cases before the courts of the Anishab. I cannot pronounce things, you guys. I'm sorry. This meeting took place in a courthouse just outside of Upper Fort Garry. It included Riel, Bruce, and 3 other Métis known as Francois Xavier Dauphiny, Pierre Poitras, and André or Jean Baptiste Bouchamin. The goal of the committee was to address and resist the selling of their land without permission, as well as the clear signs that the inhabitants would not be respected. This committee vocalized how they were standing against and preventing the lieutenant governor designate William McDougall from entering the Red River settlement until the government of Canada and Hudson's Bay Company would come to form some middle ground. McDougall set out for the Red River and the news spread. The resistance was officially formed on October 16th, solidifying Bruce as their president and Riel as the secretary. The committee set out a warning to McDougall on the 21st and created a barricade on the trail which crossed the La Salle River, the route to the settlement. The warning was received on the 30th, and McDougall was escorted away on November 2nd, the same day in which Riel led an uprising and seized Upper Fort Garry from the Hudson's Bay Company with around 400 followers. This resulted in William McTavish, the governor of the Hudson's Bay Company, asking the Métis to lay down their arms, in which Riel's in response suggestion was a provisional government, in the recording. On December 8th, the provisional government of both English and French-speaking Métis was formed. They created the Métis list of rights and began to negotiate their way the Confederation into Canada. Riel replacing Bruce as president due to illness. While this was happening, Riel's men arrested 48 armed men calling themselves Canadians. Thomas Scott was among those men, and he was executed by the provincial government due to his constant outrageous behavior. On May 12th, the Manitoba Act was passed by Parliament of Canada, receiving royal assets on July 15th of 1870, bringing Manitoba into existence. Riel as the founder.
What happened after May 12th? What happened after May 12th? After the Confederation, Riel and the Métis people weren't properly credited as the founders of Manitoba. As Canada owned the land, new coming migrants started to settle in Manitoba. Over time, the migrants started to outnumber the Métis people and resorted to hostility towards Métis people. Later on, in August 1870, the Red River Expeditionary Force, a group of over 1,000 troops, was sent by Ottawa to Manitoba. They were sent to attack. Many Métis women were raped, and some Métis men were killed. Due to this, many Métis in the newly founded province left for the Northwestern Territories, so overall, the Métis quickly faced oppression. How Métis lives change. Métis people in Manitoba struggled during this time. They lost jobs like fur trading and carrying, and populations of bison that were important dwindled, as well as poor harvests. Lands were also claimed in treaties. Overall, it was very hard for Métis people living in Manitoba, especially due to population decline from migration to other provinces that had better conditions. They had also faced oppression due to their association with the Red River Resistance, Louis Riel for their crimes and assassinations of Thomas Scott. During this time, where is Louis Riel? In 1870, following the Manitoba Act, Riel fled Canada to the United States. Similarly to Métis people, he was also scared of possible backlash due to the assassination of Thomas Scott. He returned to Canada shortly after, before getting convicted for the murder of Thomas Scott in 1874. He remained exiled in New York until 1884, until the Métis people called for him. He returned to where the Métis people were settling, which was at the time Saskatchewan, to take part in what's called the Northwest Rebellion. So, what is the Northwest Resistance? After Louis Riel's return, non-Métis and Métis people signed a petition against the government to compensate for the demands that were promised to Métis people. They led an armed force with Riel as their leader. They took part in the Battle of Duck Lake. 100 officers were present, 18 were killed by the forces led by Riel. The Canadian government then sent soldiers pressing on until they conquered the battle. Riel was forced to surrender, and he was executed the following year in 1885.
Louis is seen as a hero to Indigenous communities because he is seen as a symbol of resistance and identity. Louis is respected by especially the Métis, but also many Indigenous communities as a defender of their rights, land, and culture. The resistances he led were to combat the threat to the Métis livelihood and autonomy, actions that earned respect. His leadership helped establish Manitoba as a province and brought attention to the difficult situation of aggressive colonial expansion the Indigenous people were in during this time. Quote, he was a defender of the fundamental values that Canadians hold dear, including equality and social justice, end quote. Louis Riel Day is celebrated on November 16th, the day he was executed. This day honors his legacy, memory, and the contributions of Métis people to Canadian history. Quote, Louis Riel Day commemorates one of the great tragedies of Canadian history. It is also a day to celebrate Métis culture and the continuing progress that Métis people are making in fulfilling Riel's dream of Métis taking their rightful place within Confederation, end quote. The Métis community across Canada holds cultural events, ceremonies, and educational programs to remember Riel's version of Canada that respects the rights of Indigenous people. Quote, the Prime Minister said his government will work to honor the legacy of Louis Riel by working in partnership toward reconciliation with Indigenous people, end quote. What is the controversy today about this movement? Louis Riel is celebrated by many, however, also condemned by others, seen as either a hero, a martyr, or a traitor. For Indigenous communities, he is seen as a leader who defended Métis rights, land, and culture. However, critics see him as a traitor against the Canadian state for rebelling. People even debated his mental health at the time and his political decisions. He was portrayed as a rebel who went against national unity. These two opposite ideas and the controversy over his legacy highlight the division in how Canadian history is remembered.